Are you ready?
Let's go.
Now circling in the neutral zone.
Here's the pitch on the way. 36 yards for the win.
This.
Here comes a big chance. The shot
is
this the dagger?
The neutral zone.
This is as good as it gets.
The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca.
Now, here's your host, two-time Paralympian, Brock Richardson.
What's going on? It's time for another edition of The Neutral Zone. I am indeed your host, Brock Richardson, and coming up on today's show, we are pleased to be joined by a friend of the show and the host of the Whiskey and Cream podcast, Ari Shapiro, to talk all things Major League Baseball. Recently, it was International Day of Persons with Disabilities. The panel is going to talk about where we are today in the landscape of parasports. I'm joined by Claire Buchanan and Josh Watson. Here comes your headlines.
Neutral Zone headlines.
The Intercounty Baseball League's Toronto Maple Leafs have made history. The organization announced this week that it is honored to sign Ayami Sato, one of the best pitchers in the world, who will make history as the first woman to play professional baseball in Canada. Sato, a six-time world champion, has pitched for Team Japan throughout her career and is the only woman to win 3 consecutive MVP awards in 2014, 2016, and 2018 to go along with 2 All-Star selections at the Women's Baseball World Cup. Congratulations to the Toronto Maple Leafs Intercounty Baseball team and to Ayami Sato.
Do you know how many times I had to read that headline to go, what are they talking about? Are they talking about the Maple Leafs? I was very confused for a long time. I had to do some Googling on this to figure out, okay, I am reading this correctly, right? Yeah.
Come on, Brock. You've never heard of the Intercounty Baseball League?
I was just going to say, we all know that that league now exists.
Well, they play down at Christie Pitts, I think.
Okay.
And I know them because of the London Majors up in southwestern Ontario, where I grew up. So I knew exactly what we were talking about.
A friend of the show, Kelly McDonald, also goes to the London team, but I had no idea that the Toronto team was called the Toronto Maple Leafs. So there you go. Anyway, continuing with our headlines. Canada's new WNBA franchise will be called the Toronto Tempo. The logo is basically a ball with a T in the middle of it with racing, kind of like going fast tempo on the back of the ball. So very kind of cool logo they have going on, and I have to get used to the name Toronto Tempo, but I catch what they're going for.
Yeah, I think a lot of us were anticipating or hoping that they would stick with kind of the dinosaur theme that Toronto has going on. But I think the logo and the look of it, if you are into the vintage look, it's a sell. But yeah, I'm excited to watch the WNBA when it comes to Toronto in 2026. A huge congratulations goes out to the 2002 U.S. Paralympic para-ice hockey team. They were recently inducted into the U.S. Hockey Hall of Fame, which in 2002 would seemingly be kind of the turning point in their dominance in the sport.
Very cool. Those are our headlines for this week. If you want to get a hold of us on social media, here's how you can do that.
And welcome back to the Neutral Zone broadcast booth.
Play ball!
We're set to get this bowl game underway. The first pitch is brought to you by Brock Richardson's X account at Neutral Zone BR. Pitch and a strike. Hey, gang, why not strike up a chat with Claire Buchanan from the Neutral Zone? Find her on X at Neutral Zone CB. There's a swing of the chopper out to second base, right at Claire as she picks up the ball, throws it over to the first base for a routine play.
Out!
And fans, there's nothing routine about connecting with Cam and Josh from the Neutral Zone at Neutral Zone Cam J and at J Watson 200. And the Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Connect with them at ON Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca. Now that's a winning combination.
We are so pleased to be joined by friend of the show and the host of the Whiskey and Cream podcast, Ari Shapiro. Ari, we're here to talk all things baseball. So nice to talk to you in December.
December is my favorite time of month to talk baseball with you. You know that. That's what we do. That's the time of year where everyone's starting to hibernate internally, their souls being whittled away by the Blue Jays. So I'm here because that's why we're here.
Well, that is very true. But before we get to them, let's start at the end of the season with the LA Dodgers winning the World Series for the second time in a 4-year span. What do you make of this World Series, and what can we say about the organization over the last 4 years?
You know, it was just such a reflection of what the sport has become, right? It's you expect the World Series to be entertaining, and you hope that the whole drama that leads up to it is worthwhile. And you can't argue with that this year. This was a bit of a storybook ending for people who are fans of the really wealthy, what I like to call venture capitalist group teams with their $300-400 million payrolls. You know, it kind of breaks my heart in a way, because the Los Angeles Dodgers, for someone like me who grew up respecting the lore that came with the history of Jackie Robinson and Sandy Koufax, and then closer to my actual, years as a kid following the team, I loved the whole Kirk Gibson 1988 moment and Oral Hershiser's, extraordinary streak. And they really are a team that, here's an interesting fact. When the Blue Jays were winning the 1992 World Series, the Dodgers, I believe, had the worst record in their history, the worst season. They finished with like 99 losses. So going that far back in time, 32 years, to see them reach a point where they now have strung together half a decade of 100 win quality supremacy, both in their sport and then to win the ultimate prize and further give Dave Roberts a shot in the arm. I've never met a manager that the media has hated so much who's accomplished so much. And I think that's what makes the Dodgers so fascinating to me. They're an incredibly strategic team put together. I mean, you got the best player in the game last year. A year ago, we were talking about this, and I think we were talking about a desire to land that player. Well, look what happens when you get the best player in baseball and then proceed to sign all the other great players of baseball. So while I think from a perspective of competition, we did see close to the best of the best, baseball's become such a sport of disparity that it's very likely, given the recent signing of the Japanese pitching phenom, you're looking at supremacy for the next 3 to 4 years. I think every team now in the American League has to assume that they're going to be seeing the Dodgers at the end of the road. And that's what happens when you not only spend the money, but get good leadership. A name like Dave Roberts will be remembered the same way people will remember Bruce Bochy or Tony La Russa, and Tommy Lasorda to a latter extent. That is winners. And also another manager that I have to mention, who was one of the few 2-time winners, 2 World Series, and that's Cito Gaston. So history's fickle, and the Dodgers have shown that it's a reflection of the changing times.
Times are definitely changing, and the game itself is changing. As we speak, recently on social media, there is this idea of the golden batter, essentially where a team can call up any batter one time a game, no matter where they are in the lineup. First of all, what do you make of this potential rule? And usually where there's smoke, there's usually a fire. Is this actually going to become a rule change?
That's a great analogy. I've been asked for the remainder of the week, it seems like, where people are coming to me and saying, is this going to happen? Well, he wouldn't have mentioned it if it's not going to happen, right? We don't talk about things that couldn't not happen, do we? If we're baseball fans, because it seems like every time we get a hint of some kind of change to improve the game, it usually happens. And the 2 biggest expectations now in everyone's bated breath with baseball is anticipating the arrival of robot umpires, which is a very different sense of modernization. I think that's what frustrates me about the golden at bat concept. It's literally for people who respect what the gamer culture is, the fact that we somehow have been rendered down to about 8-second attention span sound bites. So the notion of being able to be in the ninth inning in a close game and like a video game, go to your controller and sub in your best player, for some reason, that is actually garnering attention. It's gaining momentum by the stewards of baseball. And I'm not surprised because a lot of those stewards are now closer to my age rather than being baby boomers. They understand what the millennial Gen Z crowd might appreciate as a consequence of how they've increased the excitement of the game, right? The whole idea with the pitching clock was to create more action, right? The whole idea of putting a runner on second in extra innings was to create more suspense. The problem with the golden at bat rule is you're destroying one of the most fundamental storylines in baseball that has been honored for time immemorial. And that's David versus Goliath. You can't have extraordinary moments of the little guy coming through and winning a game if you can just quickly sub in your best player. And if you happen to be a team that doesn't have really good players and your best player isn't actually that great, you know, for years, I remember with hockey, everybody talked about Shane Doan. I love Shane Doan. He was, in fact, the Phoenix Coyotes' best player. But I'm not going to sub in a Shane Doan if somebody can sub in an Austin Matthews, a Nathan McKinnon, or a Sidney Crosby. And granted, to use that kind of comparison isn't fair. Hockey's a different animal. It's very much a non-time-based linear game that requires an action and a reaction, but the golden at bat to me is a corruptive element. If you're doing it to gain excitement and more fan interest, what you're doing is you're dismantling the fundamentals of a game that, for a purist like myself and for others in this conversation we're having, it's nightmarish. It's one of those things where how long before they just start doing random stuff because they're taking referendums and, you know, wealthy billionaires, all 12 of them? I mean, people are very naive if they think baseball is owned by different interests. There's a very small club, and Rob Manfred is their ringleader and receptacle, if you will. Their Meister who's supposed to come to the fans and feel out what happens next. People who are frustrated with this and really bitter and angry have reasons to be, because I believe something like this is likely to happen before robot umpires are properly adapted. That's my prediction.
That is a scary proposition because I can't stand that idea personally. But you did bring up robot umpires, and so it has been talked about that the use of robotic strike zones is going to be used in some minor league games. What do we make of this? I'm more in favor of this than I am the golden batter personally.
Well, and I can see why, because at its earliest plan to adapt it, we are talking about not giving over to our AI masters. We're talking about having a secondary way for managers to make sure a call is authenticated properly. So if you do roll it out in the way that they're planning, who knows, it might be a success. But what bothers me is that it never needed to be an issue if the bloody umpires had just done their jobs properly in the first place. Like, the thing I have a hard time accepting is how in a country with so many umpire academies that they can't find a way to find a new crop. I mean, look, it would take ridiculous leadership and be very expensive. They'd have to break up the union that exists with baseball umpires. And that's the reason we've gotten to this point. The reason umpires are so horrible at their job is because there are no checks and balances to make sure they stay fresh and honest and capable. And I think now, because of the betting culture, right, everyone's gambling on baseball games. Can you imagine putting down a huge bet on the Dodgers and then they lose a regular season game that you're gambling on because, you know, a CB Bucknor or someone channeling their inner Angel Hernandez decides to completely blow the call? If robot umpires can create some validation and authenticity, so we're not left being frustrated and seeing, you know, X tweets about the next worst call that was made, because it does get tiresome. At first, it's amusing. You're like, look, he missed it by 4.5 inches. Why does he have a job? Well, because he will have a job for as long as that current umpiring union exists. So unfortunately, if you really wanted to make change, you'd have to get rid of that. lock them out, bring in new umpires. And there's so many talented men and women who are amazing umpires. In fact, you want to talk about an area to really increase female involvement and participation in a sport. Why not try our next round of umpires to be mostly female and see how they do in applying themselves? It has nothing to do with sexism. It has to do with practicality and finding talented men and women, as opposed to saying this is broken because a bunch of, over the hill, 60-something-year-old guys who didn't look after their weight and had heart attacks on the field and blew perfect games with regularity. The history is gruesome. It's almost like a cancer, because when a sport can be influenced by inept or having reprobates as your officials, your sport stinks. And that's one of the reasons why baseball suffers. It doesn't have the scrutiny that a lot of other sports have with their officials. You look at basketball, if they even have a whiff that you're doing something that isn't kosher to influence the game, you're gone. Same thing with football, and to some extent with hockey, even though hockey has its own, issues with some of those officials. But baseball needs a clean sweep. And if that means bringing in full implementation of robot umpires, that would be a shame. To me, instead of worrying about the tech, I'd worry about finding good people and giving them a chance to have a job and shine by overachieving on your grand stage when you're playing in front of fans who love the sport.
I couldn't agree more. And while we're talking about fresh starts, the Toronto Blue Jays no doubt had a disappointing season last year. But there have been some team and individual awards won in the offseason that management is remaining status quo. Is this the right move? And where do we go from here to get a good fresh start in this next season? It's
a horrible thing, isn't it, when history repeats itself and you find yourself saying the same excuses, delivering the same explanations. We got our share last year with the Ohtani farce, debacle, whatever you want to call it. It was such a joke on everybody. It especially hurt the fans because of all those thousands of Blue Jays fans who were like, oh my God, he's coming. I've checked my social media. I've had, who was it, Nightingale, or what was that other writer? Who was the writer that came out and said he's on his way because someone else told him? So he ended up effectively lying. John Morosi. John Morosi came out and said Shohei Ohtani was on the way. So it shows you that it's so disingenuous, the manipulation of how the public relations machines of every franchise justifies their good, bad, and ugly. The Blue Jays are just ugly because now with Juan Soto out of the picture, they have to make excuses and look for guys who are like in their mid-30s with a 2.3 F4 because the fans are demanding action. And a lot of these players, Soto would have at least represented that true anchor to start a really great retool, because now you've got Vlad Guerrero. And the fact that it was his friend, I don't know about you guys, but if you're one of my really closest friends and I want you to come and play in my market and you turn to me and say, no, I'm not interested, I have to seriously analyze my own market. That's where baseball is so cruel, because if we would have had other Canadian franchises, the Blue Jays could have been more competitive in what they do with their international reputation. But anyone who knows these Blue Jays can see how in the last 10, 15, 20 years, it's completely bottomed out. They actually recaptured reputational momentum, if you will, with 2015 and 2016. There was an opportunity to show the baseball world and fans that they were a serious baseball club. But this whole 16 and onwards rebuild, retool, try to compete. You asked me a question earlier in this round table about managers or the Dodgers and what management leadership means. Look at those names, and then look at the chumps we've had. We got rid of Gibbons when we had momentum. We had Montoyo in here, and we didn't. We were able to attract some free agency and some interest, but then they fired him and replaced him with a guy who has zero credibility. And so if I'm Juan Soto, do I really want to come to Toronto with the dollar implications, the tax implications, the fact that I'm going to have John Schneider as my manager, Ross Atkins as my GM, and Mark Shapiro as my president? Hell no. Hell no. I'm going to the Metropolitans faster than a carpet could carry me, as if it were summoned by a genie. This is the sad state of what exists in Toronto. I've always, I've become a real scathing critic, and to the point where I get accused of farming engagement with my cynicism. I'm not being cynical. I'm telling you the truth. I'm asking you to consider the reality of how this franchise, how it acts and how it governs itself for you, the fan, to respect it. Does it care about your feelings? Does it care about your loyalty? Does it care that you pay so much for parking and that you pay so much for really bad beer and terrible hot dogs, and that they've siphoned off all the private places in their new renovations for people who are in the 1%? It really has fallen from grace. And a small part of me thought, hey, maybe with Edward Rogers at the helm, now that he owns everything and it's just a matter of time before Rogers and Bell, Rogers eats Bell and merges into some kind of a single telecom media baron provider. I keep saying to myself, maybe with him at the helm, he'll go back to being a baseball purist and respect all of us generationally who followed this team. Because it really is a betrayal to see them now with their hands in their pocket. They have no battle plan. They have no commitment to excellence. They kind of shrug and accept when the shit hits the proverbial fan. They're filled with their chock full of corporate excuses. They throw out chairs from the old renovations and have fans find them in old parking lots and what do they call them? Garbage dumpsters, and then turn around and try to make it seem like it was just a mistake so they can sell it to people who want a piece of history. This is the most opportunistic and unscrupulous group of reprobates as a front office as I've ever witnessed. And I've seen a lot of them. Because I remember when the Blue Jays, even as a little wee boy, I remember when the Blue Jays were struggling to get credibility, but it was always with their head held high and with the sense of, we'll see what happens next year. There's no way any Blue Jays fan can feel the same way today, functionally looking at the state of this team and what they did in the past calendar year.
I'm honestly surprised that the management team lasted through the offseason personally, but based on that assessment, maybe I shouldn't be. Given that Juan Soto is off the board now, so to speak, who are some of the names that we should be watching for in the offseason, and do we stand a chance of bringing any of them here?
That's a great question. And by the way, I'm glad that my assessment makes you think otherwise. I don't want you to ever think that it comes from a place where I want to be willfully cynical or someone who's trying to find reasons to hate on them for the sake of hating. It's not that at all. I just want to see dignity. I would like to see them do the things that a franchise should do. For example, when you set your sights on a player, so many different players have been mentioned, and in different areas too. They were seriously talking about maybe considering Hoffman as a reliever, or what the Mets, Pete Alonso, or they were looking at Profar. There was like just this veritable mishmash. And it kind of reminds me of when they acquired George Springer, because when they acquired him, he came with a real bill of goods that he would add something. And he's been such a disaster. What I'd like to see them do at the end of the day is literally by tomorrow, if it's even possible, first and foremost, to answer your question, they need to secure their internal resources. They need to let the fans know where they stand with their two stars. And until that gets resolved, it really doesn't matter who they acquire, right? Because if you end up losing Vlad, and if there's something wrong with Bo to the point where next year he produces another, and this is pretty astounding, guys, I think you'll agree, he was a negative WAR player last year. Like, there was a quote that came out that he's off the board and they wouldn't consider him for a trade because he's untouchable. Yeah, he's untouchable. Nobody wants to touch him. Who wants to touch a minus 1.3 WAR player? I mean, I could probably play baseball for them and just doing nothing, maybe balance it out and end up with an even rating. I don't know. I've got some cat-like reflexes left in my old bones. But I'd like to see them first resolve that. And once they can figure out what they're going to do with the fate of Guerrero Jr., who I think you can all agree, what reason does he have to stay? I mean, put yourself in his shoes, right? You're looking at the state of the team. You look at their chances of acquiring resources and getting better. And then you're looking at the fallout of this horrible disconnect between the fans and the corporate head stewards who've systematically made this such a sad place. It's, at the end of the day, if they can't figure that out, I don't think it really matters who they acquire, because once Vlad leaves, whatever superstar, credible, Austin Matthews equivalent you want to call him, he's not a generational talent. He's a really good baseball player. And my fear is they're going to go out and get free agents in their 30s who were once really good baseball players and will end up being another, George Springer potential mistake, especially when you consider the state of economics. I mean, they signed Soto to what? A 15-year contract? Are you kidding me? That's not economics anymore. That's like the Canadian government spending or the American Federal Reserve deficit. It's like a number so insane and silly that it really doesn't matter anymore. And again, I'm being cynical again. I'd rather just tell you they should try to go after Tyler O'Neill or Max. Or now that I think about it, all those players have already been signed. So all this time is being wasted. Nothing is being done. Let's go Blue Jays.
Yeah. It's been a crazy couple of seasons. It's been a crazy off season. The scary part, Ari, is that the best thing that's been inside of the Rogers Center in arguably 3 years is the Eras Tour and the Taylor Swift showing up. It's not been a good scene at all for the Toronto Blue Jays and the Rogers Center. Like, the fact that the best thing that you can hang your hat on is the Eras Tour and you're a baseball market, give me a break. I get your thoughts on that.
It's astonishing, isn't it? It really is. And it's such a rich and cosmopolitan city if you ask them, right? I mean, let's be honest. The days of Toronto, the glorious, has been replaced by Toronto, the dysfunctional. Like, the gridlock in construction alone makes it prohibitive. How can you be a town that entertains and provides world-class sporting events if your athletes can't even get there unless they walk? And that is just such a systematic failure of civil engineering planning, municipality planning, whatever you want to call it. There are a lot of people making a lot of money, just like the head office of the Blue Jays, and they're doing nothing. They're literally not bringing anything to either their legacy. And this is the part that if you're Mark Shapiro, I'm like, dude, seriously? You're like a relic at this point. The last time you did anything that involved real baseball, I don't know, success was what, in the mid 2000s, late 2000s, when he was with the Cleveland Indians? It's 2024. Get a grip. If you can't do the job, let someone who will. And stop making me have to justify to people that that's the pronunciation of my last name. It's not. You butchered my life that way. Stop butchering Blue Jays fans. And if Rogers has any sense, they'll find a real baseball guy. And, lately I've been noticing on social media that so many former Blue Jays are coming back and they're very vocal and active. And it makes me feel wonderful because I befriended a lot of them from my generation. I was very close friends with Tony Fernandez. And unfortunately, when he passed away, I found myself sitting on hours and hours of documentary footage that I can use to release, and I will, to tell his story. And so I'm seeing these former Blue Jays and I'm thinking, why not consider hiring them? People who actually played the game, understand it more than simple analytics, but literally by being able to tell you how to build relationships with players. So when you have negotiations and when you go to arbitration, you don't end up making them feel so low. See, that's something people forgot. The reason that Bo and Vlad have chips on their shoulder is because when they went to arbitration, it was pretty horrible, especially Bo recently. There was no reason to send him to arbitration. He's your best hitter on your team, and he's coming off back-to-back years leading MLB in hits. Why you got to go to arbitration? I'll tell you why. Because it's a corporation run by corporate hacks who don't know the first thing about why fans love baseball, why they love heroes in baseball, and by gutting them like they did, especially after 2016. Remember that? 2015 had all those tales of heroism coming from the Donaldsons and the Prices and the Tulowitzkis and whatever it was. They just dismantled it all. They didn't care about it. It wasn't important. They wanted to build the team their way. Well, ladies and gentlemen, look at your modern-day Toronto Blue Jays. And anyone with any self-respect in baseball will point at it and say, that's a joke. So get your shit together. Seriously, Ross Atkins, what are you going to be? Worst GM of the year for the next 7 years in a row? What are you, on a 15-year plan? I'm seriously thinking of writing like dystopian Blue Jay stories late in the evening on social media just to get people chuckling so they can appreciate the sad and pathetic irony of how the fans keep tolerating this. Last year was a banner year for attendance from expectations. What was it, 34,000 per game? Like, who are these people with this kind of money and patience to come and watch this kind of garbage? But they do. And that's what I hate about it, is that they take advantage of the fact that no matter what happens, no matter how bad it gets, this town, Toronto, they've got a strong baseball heart. And so you got to respect it. And the way you respect it is you look after the fans. You don't milk them and get all greedy and take advantage of their bottom dollar. You give them something they can love and tell their children.
Well, someone that I respect and that we respect is the one and only Ari. And we thank you very much for taking the time to do this with us and talk about baseball in December. We greatly appreciate it. And maybe we can do an early season preview when things will be so much better in March and April, when the Blue Jays will be ready to contend for a World Series.
I love the idea of that. My agent will call yours.
Perfect. Awesome.
Cheers, my friends. Be well.
The Neutral Zone is sponsored by the Ontario Para Network. Their focus on the growth and development of wheelchair basketball, tennis, and rugby in Ontario.
There was a time in this iteration of the Neutral Zone, or not this iteration, but previous iterations, where we would do a video component. We don't do that today yet. Who knows what the future may hold, but we have the privilege of being able to see each other, the co-hosts that are with me, and most of the time the guests will also appear on camera as well. And there was one point that I just want to articulate for the audience, because you will not be able to see this on the podcast because you don't see it. But I said to Ari, the greatest thing that happened to the Rogers Center was the 6 shows of the Eras Tour. And I promise you, I looked up and I saw Claire like howling in the background, muted. I thought she was going to fall off whatever chair she was on. Claire, are you okay? Did I almost kill you with that comment?
No, I mean, it was more of a truth than a comment. It's probably I can't remember the last time probably an entire Rogers Stadium was filled with happy individuals. It's been a while, so it's nice to hear just brutal honesty when Ari's on. And I said this off mic in between segments, but it's if you're a big Blue Jays fan out there and you're missing episodes of the Neutral Zone when Ari's on here, you're missing out on some good Blue Jays content. And he really tells it like it is, and it's refreshing, because as a Blue Jays fan, he's right. We've gotten fed this, oh yeah, we're fine, we'll do better next year, blah blah blah, and that's not the case. We kind of have to dismantle the whole thing and restart, and it's disheartening, because the same thing, it's a Toronto sports issue. It's not just a Blue Jays issue of it being really corporate led and not really focused on the fan experience and what the fans want. So it's I'll say it again. It's refreshing to have him on and really get some brutal honesty.
It definitely is. And I mean, I look at the Juan Soto thing that we've been experiencing this week, and I am proud of Torontonians for at least not falling for the trap like we did last year with Shohei Ohtani. We didn't have anybody tracking flights. We didn't have pundits coming on and say, oh, he's definitely coming to Toronto. We learned. But realistically, we also shouldn't have to be so jaded as to say, well, based on last year, we know he's not coming. Because why shouldn't he want to come? But Ari makes a great point. If he's Vlad's best friend, or whichever member of the team he's best friends with, and he says to them, nah, I don't want to come play on your team, like, what does that say about our team?
Well, and just the landscape of playing professional sports in Canada, it's the reality of it is, it's taxes, and there's just a different system here in Canada, and it deters athletes from coming here, aside from how we're doing in the actual season.
It does, but I also wonder how much of that is manufactured, because, I mean, we look at Shohei last year. He went to the Dodgers, and yes, I'm sure California's tax brackets are different than ours, and it doesn't break down the same. but he was able to defer a bunch of his money to when he's not going to be living in California. So you're telling me we can't get that creative? Sure we can. We've got plenty of accountants up here. I honestly feel like it has more to do with organizational dysfunction than it does the city or the taxes or any of those garbage narratives we keep being fed. Because look at 92 and 93. Ari mentioned it during his segment. Look at the players we got during that. You okay, Brock? You jumped a little there.
Yes, my dog barked in the background, and it was like, whoa, that's a dog bark in the background. So, yes.
And she is still barking, but that's okay. She's just a big fan of ours, I guess.
She might be a Blue Jays fan, giving her input.
Maybe.
Or she's arguing over what they're not doing.
Yes, that's possible. But yeah, look at the players we had, the David Cohns and the Paul Molitors and the Dave Winfields. Like, you're telling me the tax situation is different now than it was back then? It's probably better. Like, I don't buy that Toronto is not a destination. If Toronto's not a destination, it's something, in my mind, organizationally, whether it's Leafs, Raptors, Blue Jays, TFC, like, I don't buy that it's the city. I love the city. I wouldn't want to live there full time, and I live in the burbs, but I live close enough to it that I can enjoy it. And yeah, it's a magnificent city. Why wouldn't somebody want to be here?
Let's move off from the Toronto Blue Jays because it pains me to have more discussion over them in the month of December. Yeah, I thought we would bring up a topic that some might say we probably should have done last week, but because our episode releases on Tuesday and we pre-record it, it just slipped my mind. So I figured we'd discuss it now. Recently, it was International Day of Persons with Disabilities, and I thought we would talk a little bit about it and the landscape of para sports today. And just to give you a little bit of background for the starting point of the conversation, this day was established on December 3rd of 1992, and it's to celebrate and enhance the movement of people with disabilities. So this means that this is 32 years running, this celebration and awareness of people with disabilities, and the landscape of sports is where I want to go with this conversation. So the question is, where are we on the landscape of sports and people with disabilities 32 years on? Let's start with Claire on this.
I think we're heading in the right direction, and we've definitely made some leaps and bounds in some regard in terms of prize money when the Paralympics are being held. And we have gone a long way with broadcasting and exposure. I think our biggest gap in sports right now, in Canada specifically, is just the gap in sponsorship that para athletes get, and it's all connected. It's para athletes aren't getting the exposure, so that doesn't lead to sponsorships because people don't know that they exist and what they're doing. And so athletes are having to do their own marketing essentially. And yes, we live in the age of social media, and it's at your fingertips, but it's just another thing that we have to add to our plate in order to close that gap and kind of feel like we are receiving the equal amount of again, prize money, sponsorship, broadcasting, exposure, all of that. It's a lot of it is put on the actual shoulders of disabled athletes. So I that's where my biggest gap is in terms of sports here in Canada.
Yeah, I look at your own situation, Claire, with the women's team having to fundraise your way to Norway for a world championship. Like, what are we even doing here? Why is this a thing? Why do you as a team have to go out and sell chocolates or oranges or adorable teddy bears like your mom makes, or whatever it is, in order to fund your way to a world championship? Like, this is craziness. And yet I can say that I think, whether it's variety of sports available or whether it's opportunity, I do think we are better than we were. I can remember growing up where if I wanted to participate in track and field, I could do track, and that was it. And I don't even think when I was young that para ice hockey or sledge hockey was a thing yet. I know wheelchair basketball was because I had a chance to try it. I know wheelchair rugby was because I got a chance to try it. Never doing it again. Those London Flyers guys are just nuts, but I digress. We've come a long way, but I can't help but feel like we still have so far to go.
I struggle because I understand the purpose of December 3rd. The reason we're talking about it is why I understand the purpose of December 3rd. The challenge that I have, and this goes beyond, this day itself. This is everything. The challenge that I have is what happens the day after? And what happens the day after, Josh, sometimes it feels like we just go on about our business and we don't build on top of it. And then next year comes around and December 3rd comes around and International Day of Persons with Disabilities is here again and all this exposure. And then the day after, it just doesn't feel like we have the momentum that we do on the day. And as Ari said, and I can't remember if it was on the podcast or post interview, but we can sing Kumbaya to a point, but then also shoot some brutal honesty and say where we are. Do you feel that we get momentum beyond the December 3rd?
No. No, we definitely do not. The way I look at it is, if everything was perfect, there wouldn't be a day. And because there's a day, there's a lot that needs to change. And it's not just in the world of sports, but we'll narrow the lens to the world of sports for this podcast. It just, whether it's travel to the events, whether it's the events themselves, whether it's the officiating for the events, there's room to improve. The day that I can go to a track and field meet and have officials that treat me as though I am an athlete first, I'll be a happy man. We still run into, and it's rare, it is rare, but we still run into situations where you get officials who just want everybody to play. Like, I'm not here to play. I'm here to throw things and set world records. Thanks.
Yeah, that's
why are we still having this rah good for you kind of mentality?
Yeah, and that's, you said it perfectly. It's the mentality of the vision that people have when they think about disabled people. And then you think about disabled athletes, and we're always put in this box of, well, we're less than, and we do less.
We're charity
and
cases.
So that we should receive less. And that's just not the case. And I think it's great that we have days like this, and it brings awareness, and that is kind of the foundation to grow upon, is actually getting that message out there of, actually, no, we're high performance athletes. We're here to compete. We're not here to get a participation trophy. We're not 6-year-old Timbit soccer players. just out to get some exercise. We're here to break records and set the tone and push that envelope for the next generation of para athletes here in Canada. And it's I'm glad and very grateful that you brought up the example of the women's team. It feels like in all para sports in general is that it's like 2 feet forward, 1 step back kind of thing. And it's, you get in these moments of like, okay, you really feel like you're getting traction and good things are happening. And then one swoop and the rug is kind of pulled out from underneath you. And it comes from those views of, no, actually, I really don't think you deserve this right now, or you have to do these things in order to earn them. And it's really frustrating because it does just come from that closed-minded view of disabled individuals and then disabled athletes.
My mother-in-law does love her teddy bear, by the way. But yeah, the fact that you have to do things like that, or that you sit there and you get something one year and then the next year you turn around and, oh well, this lawn bowling team needs it more than you do. Like, nothing against lawn bowling, but excuse me, what are we?
You
what
lose
are we doing
athletes. That's the reality of it.
Yeah,
you lose
absolutely.
athletes to more equitable opportunities, and it's kind of a punch in the gut to you and your teammates. But that's the reality of it. It's one, as a disabled athlete, I know we're only talking in the scope of sports right now, but underneath it, it's a systemic problem here in Canada that disabled people are greatly underpaid and undersupported. And so our entire existence, for the most part, is finding those opportunities that are going to give you better opportunities, because we have to. It's a survival mode for a lot of us. And it's, if you're not being supported properly in one spot, you sometimes have no choice but to move on and go to something that you are less passionate about, because you can't do it in the sport that you're in.
So there's a couple of things here. And the first point that I'll make, because I don't want the women's team coming at me when I make this comment, so I'm gonna preface it first. But there are athletes who are carded, who still have to pull money out of their own life, out of their own situation. And just recently, I found out that carding went up like $300 or something, and they got back pay from the year before. Okay, which is good. I'm glad it went up. But then you have people like the women's team, and there are more than just the women's team. There are more organizations that have to fund themselves than just the women's team. But then you have teams that have to fund themselves, and you literally say to them, "Oh, you can represent Canada and Norway, but here's the catch: you have to spend 5,000-10,000 of your own money. And by the way, we're not giving you anything in your pocket. You have to fund that yourself. And we, as the organization, will help you in making adorable bears and doing all this thing." But it's that moment of, you can participate on the world stage, but there's the caveat right here. And now you got to shell out your own money.
Yes, and like I alluded to before, it feels like you're moving in the right direction. But again, there's these big systemic problems and issues that don't seem to be changing at all. And it's not just a sport problem. It's a system problem here in Canada, and it's unfortunate because it's fundraising has taken up a lot of my life over the last 10 years. And I am proud that the game and the women's national team has gotten to where we are right now. But again, there's so much more to do. And it's the cool thing about parasport is that it really shows how much community you have behind you. And it's within those fundraising moments that you truly realize how much support you have and who your community is. And it's well, now we need to have those organizations and the important people up top become part of that community. And it's unfortunate because you can't do it alone. You need those people, and it's relationship building, and it's like Ari said, it's kind of it's organizational, and it's the big heads on top at the top, right? That unfortunately hold a lot of the power and responsibility, and we have to continue having those conversations and keeping those relationships positive, because they can truly make a huge difference, hopefully very soon in the future.
I really believe, Josh, that para athletes are the most dedicated people that I can think of, because yes, there are able-bodied athletes who are dedicated because they have to do some of their own funding as well. But para athletes literally have to do it for the love of sport, because if you don't have the love, what are you doing? Because you're looking at your bank account going, crap, I just wrote a check for 10 grand over the course of the year, and what did I do it for? Oh, that's right, I did it because I did it with my country, and I did it because I did it for myself and my teammates.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very, very frustrating at times to be so dedicated to something and then to not feel the support back. I mean, you look at people like yourself, Brock, who don't necessarily drive and maybe have to rely on public transportation to get to their meets or their practices or what have you. I can remember teammates of mine telling me, oh, I'm probably not going to be able to keep playing because I'm going to have to start taking public transit and they won't allow me to bring my hockey bag on the bus. Excuse me? Or you get someone that we all know, and you'll know exactly who I'm talking about when I describe her. She's into her golden years now, and she still travels from downtown Toronto out to whatever venue she has to go to just to practice or to play. And in a lot of cases, that means 2 bus systems, because even though the GTA is the GTA, the bus systems don't talk to each other. Like, the barriers to sport are so big and so, I don't even know the word. They're just, they're so big that I don't know how some people do it.
I mean, in my mind, I can literally hear my family going, yeah, but I fund your nephew, going to hockey and going and we do meat orders and this and that. And yes, I hear that argument too. My problem is, you're going to go represent your country and you have to dole out so much money. I'm not taking away from minor league, this, that. Those things cost money. I get it. But it's when you represent your country and you're giving that carrot and you're suggesting, here's the carrot, but then here's the thing we're going to take away from you because we're going to take into your own account and you're going to have to dole out the money. And that's where I have the problem with sports. If you're asking people to represent on a national team and yet asking them also to dole out so much money, that's where the problem in lies. Claire, the thing that comes to my mind here, and maybe this is just me, but as I was putting this together this week, I started to think about it, and the thing that kept coming in my head over and over again was, why do I feel like the Paralympics in Paris did more job of exposing the goodness that exists in athletes, if that's even a word, than December 3rd? Like, am I wrong in feeling that the Paralympics did more of a job in exposing what is good about people with disabilities than December 3rd itself?
I mean, the Paralympics is a big stage, and you would be crazy not to use that platform to do that. And it's pushed the Paralympic movement quite a bit in the right direction. But yeah, it just feels like a day like that just it gets fallen on deaf ears kind of thing. And it is what it is. You have one day of people making posts and saying that they're advocators and that they're here to help change. But again, it's what happens the next day. We can chit chat and talk about it until our ears fall off, but where's the action? Where's the actual systemic change? Where's the voices that have the power to make change? Where are they putting action into these claims of being allies?
Recently, the Canadian Paralympic team, and probably the Olympic team as well, but definitely the Paralympic team, had the chance to go to Parliament Hill and meet with dignitaries. There are all kinds of pictures on social media of Justin Trudeau meeting with different athletes and different para-athletes sitting in the speaker's chair in the House of Commons and things. That's all great. But do you think Justin Trudeau remembers even one of the names of the people he met that day? Not likely. And like, he's the prime minister of our country. So where do we even go with that? And I mean, it makes sense to me that the Paris Paralympics would do more as a movement because it's a grander scale. It's televised. It's in front of people's faces. December 3rd, unfortunately, is a day, and if you quiz people, they might go, "Oh yeah, it's Disabled Persons Day or something." But it doesn't have the same cachet. It doesn't have the same exposure. And I would say it's supposed to be an international day, but is it really?
Yeah, I'm
Part of the challenge.
So Canada has some great organizations that try to help close this gap of financial aid with high performance athletes, and Can Fund is one of them. It's you apply every year, and a select hand of athletes receive $8,000, usually leading up in a Paralympic and Olympic year. And I'm just going to read a couple of facts that they post. And it's stats. It's 63% of the athletes applying to Can Fund also work part-time jobs after training 4 to 8 hours each day. And then you have 55% of those athletes that are applying for this $8,000 grant are in debt. We're not just talking about a little bit of dollars here and there that athletes are needing. And these athletes are in debt. Their bank accounts are empty, and they're still showing up and training and working multiple jobs and having families and then finding time to rest all between that. There's huge gaps, and it sucks that it comes down to money, but that's where we need it. We need more money in the hands and bank accounts of Team Canada athletes. And like you said, it's when we're talking about minor sports and your 17, 18-year-old athletes on their development squads. Yes, you're going to have to fundraise in those situations. But when you're representing Canada, you should not have to worry if you're spending your last $20 on gas or food or being able to keep your lights on and then waking up and just having to forget about all of it and focus on training. You can't get the best out of your athletes putting them in that situation.
And I've always been told that, or always understood that the carding that athletes get needs to be spent mainly on training and all those sorts of things. I understand that, and I can appreciate that. The challenge is that when you're starting from zero, and then they say, "Oh, here's a chunk of money," Claire, you just pointed out $8,000 sounds good in the moment, but we know in today's economy how far $8,000 can go. It doesn't go very far, and that's the way it is. And when I was putting this together today too, I was talking to some people in my circle, and one of the things that came out, and I'd like both of your thoughts, is, well, there's a day for everything. There's a day for this disability. There's a day for that. There's a day for whatever. You can Google it, and I'm sorry if I just woke up everyone's smart device, but you can ask, what's today, and it usually comes up with, oh, today is such and such a day. We're so inundated in days and things that people can't remember. So I just think we have to be careful as to how much we're overloading the population, who probably, if you interviewed 100 of them, they'd say, yeah, we want to get involved, but there's so much that my brain just can't do all the mental work on it, Claire. And I want comment from both of you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's a slew of information constantly being thrown at people, and the people that want to put their foot in and try to help, and they don't know where to start. And they get to a point of, I don't know where to start, and there's so much coming at me, so I'm just going to take this one out. They don't know where to start, and it's frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. There is literally a day for anything and everything. I mean, those of us that have calendars on our phones and use them regularly will look, and I looked the other day and it was like Statute of Westminster Day, and I'm like, what the heck does that mean? I have no idea or no context of what this is. And so things do get lost in the noise, unfortunately. And because we are a marginalized group, I think our day tends to get pushed aside. It's, I think, better and more widely known because of social media, and people can get behind a hashtag and things like that. But should it really take a hashtag for people to give a damn?
Some people in my world call it a pound sign, and that's where
those people are over 35. I can promise you that.
Yes, they are, and I will not mention who it is because I like my life, but
I think we know who it is.
Yeah, there's certain scenarios where it's just people live in different generations, and so
of course,
to try to get them to understand and do and all that it's tough. So I thought we would spend some time talking about this day and how important it is, and just the whole landscape. Because we promise most weeks, I wasn't sure that this week was going to be that week, but then it dawned on me. We promise most weeks that we do talk something parasports related, and Ari so kindly slotted into our normal interview slot. So that was our mainstream sports discussion, and then we switch gears into the para world. So that is the end of our episode for this week. I would like to thank Josh Watson, Claire Buchanan. I'd also like to thank our technical producer, Mark Aflalo. Stay tuned for next week, because you just never know what happens when you enter the neutral zone. Be safe, be well.
The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Ontario Para Network. Connect with them at ON Para Network. Follow them online at onpara.ca. Now that's a winning combination.